He thought he was just returning a lost alien child, but it was a test to replace their king. While surveying a dead zone after a meteor storm, human scout Miran finds a small alien child huddled under the roots of a scorched tree. She speaks no known language but clings to him like she already knows him. He decides to return her to the forbidden highland village, unaware that every step is being watched. The sky was still breathing smoke when Miran stepped onto the cracked earth. Ash floated like gray snow, swirling in slow circles around his boots. The meteor storm had burned a 10-mile scar into the valley, turning every tree into black bone and every creature into dust. His visor flickered air still unbreathable, radiation minimal, temperature rising again. Just another survey. He moved carefully, scanning the jagged terrain with the cold precision of a frontier scout. 17 months into the border contract, he had seen his share of strange impact zones. But this one felt hushed, like the land itself was holding its breath. Then something shifted. A whisper of motion just left of his peripheral. Moran turned sharply, weapon half raised. There beneath the tangled remains of a burned root system was movement. Small, not hostile, not large enough to be. He approached slowly, boots crunching over bone-dry ash. Nestled in the hollow was a child, or something shaped like one. She was curled in a fetal position, her skin darkened with soot, her hair a tangled, silvery mass across her face. No protective suit, no breathing gear, just thin, ceremonial cloth clinging to her tiny frame as if it had never burned. And her eyes, when she opened them, glowed faintly, not with fear, but recognition. Miran froze. What the hell? The child reached for him quietly. No words, no sound, just a slow, trembling hand that touched the edge of his boot like she knew him, like she had been waiting. He brought her aboard the crawler despite every protocol screaming at him not to. Alien contact was off limits in a red zone. No communication lines were open to Central Command, and the crawler's data link had been severed 2 storms ago. But when he tried to walk away, she had cried without sound, her mouth open, no voice escaping. Her eyes wide, almost pleading. She didn't speak any language he recognized. And yet, when he crouched before her with his palms open, she walked right into his arms. Inside the crawler, warmth slowly returned to her face. She wouldn't eat rations, wouldn't drink water, but she traced the skin of his hand like it was made of memory. Her fingers, small, rough, almost clawed at the tip, moved in deliberate patterns. Circles, then lines, then a single tap on his chest. Tap, tap, pause. She looked into his eyes, then placed her own palm against her chest, not for warmth, for meaning. Miran had seen hundreds of species, memorized first contact cues and reflexes, but this wasn't in any database. No verbal cues, no mimicry, just presence, deliberate, ancient, watching him the way a candle watches the wind. By nightfall, they'd left the impact zone. Miran rerouted the crawler up into the highlands, past the old, forgotten roads etched by earlier expeditions. The child had grown restless when he turned toward base camp, so he tested something. When he changed course toward the mountains, her breath slowed. When he veered off again, she curled into herself and looked away. By midnight, he was following her heartbeat. At 02:00, the crawler's path bent toward a rise of stone no human had charted. The maps had marked it as a forbidden ecological ruin. No active life, no scans returned. But there it was, a cluster of pale structures carved directly into the rock wall, glowing faintly with bioluminescent patterns. No lights, no tech, no towers, just silence. He stopped the crawler on instinct. The child leaned forward, pressing her small hand against the observation glass. A single tear formed in the corner of her eye. Then she looked at him again, that same question in her face, that same recognition. He stepped out with her in his arms. The wind was dry and almost warm. The air carried a strange scent like stone, blood, and lavender. No movement, no sign of life. Until she moved. The child wriggled from his arms and placed her bare feet on the stone. She stood there, eyes closed, palms out, and the symbols carved into the walls began to flicker, soft pulses of white moving like breath through the architecture. Then came the sound, not from her, from above. A slow hum, bone deep, subsonic, felt more than heard. Miran looked up. On the edge of a stone balcony above the carved city, a figure stood, tall, still, wrapped in pale cloth and veils that flowed like mist in the wind. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. But Miran felt it. He was being judged, and not just by one. More shapes emerged, ghost-like, from the walls and pillars. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all cloaked, all silent, watching. He held his breath, instinctively bringing the child closer. But she stepped away, walking slowly toward the steps that led down into the stone village. And not a single figure blocked her path. She looked back once, as if inviting him. As if this was always the way it was meant to begin. Miran hesitated. Every law he'd sworn to obey told him to retreat, report, quarantine. But the child had trusted him. And somewhere, deep beneath the weight of those alien stares, something ancient stirred in his blood. Not fear, not warning, belonging. He followed her. And far above, in the shadows of the carved walls, a hooded elder turned to another and whispered in the lost tongue. He passed the first sign. The bond has tasted him. Miran enters the alien village, a place sealed off for decades under ancient exile law. The elders permit him entry only because the child touched him. The villagers, tall and silent with glowing silver eyes, never speak, yet one of them, a veiled woman named Sira, watches him with unreadable intensity. The first sound Miran heard inside the stone city was his own breathing. Not a single voice echoed through the winding pathways. No footsteps, no rustling of cloth. Only silence, ancient and deliberate, pressed between the pillars of pale marble and dark rootwork. The child led him without hesitation. She moved barefoot over the polished stone, each step perfectly timed, as if retracing something deeply familiar. Her small figure moved past the silent villagers, tall, veiled beings who stood in doorways, on ledges, or against trees that grew straight from the walls. They watched him, but they did not blink. Their eyes were silver, not reflective, glowing, subtle, steady. Like a dying star behind a veil of water, they said nothing, did nothing, yet their presence felt absolute. He wasn't in a village. He was in a memory. The child led him to a circular atrium carved into the cliffside. A council of elders stood waiting, 7 figures draped in living silk, vines woven into their garments. Their faces concealed behind opalescent masks etched with sharp symbols. The central elder stepped forward. He was taller than the others, almost unnaturally so. A staff of bone and crystal hovered beside him, never touching the ground. When he raised his hand, the others bowed their heads. Then he pointed at Miran, and at the child, then at the ground between them. Miran hesitated. "I don't understand." The elder tapped his staff once. The floor shimmered, patterns appearing like frost forming across glass. A map, symbols, concentric circles. One mark at the center glowed red, his position. The child stepped onto it without fear. She turned and extended her hand toward him once more. No words, just that same question. That same pull. He stepped forward, and as his foot crossed the inner circle, the glow pulsed outward like a heartbeat. The elders nodded. The staff returned to the elder's hand with a soft chime. Then, as one, they turned and walked away. Miran stood there, stunned. No ceremony, no welcome, no demand. Just a moment, and a mark. "She touched you," came a voice behind him, soft, feminine, low like falling dusk. He turned sharply. She was standing beneath an arched walkway, barely visible between two thick vines of night-blooming flora. She was robed differently, her veil dark and sheer, her height nearly matching his. Her face was hidden, but her eyes, they weren't glowing like the others. They were still, watching, absorbing. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice was calm, but not passive, measured. The way someone speaks when they've already decided what you are and are only waiting to see if you'll prove them right. Miran stepped cautiously toward her. "They let me in. They let her in," she corrected. "She chose you. That broke the exile. She was alone." In the dead zone. She was never alone. He studied her. The robe she wore shimmered faintly as she moved, threaded with something metallic beneath the cloth. Her hands were uncovered, fingers long and precise. She was younger than the elders, but not a child. Somewhere between wisdom and warning. "And you are?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly. "Sira." He waited for more. It didn't come. Sira turned and began to walk. Without asking, Miran followed. The path curved through archways into a chamber bathed in soft blue light. A bioluminescent tree, its roots suspended in air, pulsed above a shallow pool. The walls around it held carvings, millennia-old pictographs depicting rituals, figures with hands raised to the stars, and what looked eerily like human silhouettes in ancient alien poses. Sira stood beneath the tree. "The last time one of your kind crossed our borders, war followed," she said. Miran kept his voice low. "That wasn't me. It was your blood." She finally turned to face him fully. Her veil caught the breeze, lifting slightly, not enough to reveal her face, but enough to show the line of her jaw, the curve of her throat. There was a scar near her collarbone, small and old, almost forgotten by her skin but not by her posture. "You're not here to return her," Sira said. "I what? You think you are," she said quietly. But she wasn't lost. She was sent. The words hit him harder than he expected. "Sent by who?" Sira didn't answer. She looked at the pool. "You felt it," she said softly. "When she touched you, a weight. Not heavy, not cruel, just old." He nodded, barely. "That was the marking," she continued. "It does not choose the strongest. It does not choose the willing. It chooses the heart that doesn't ask why it loves before it acts." Miran took a step closer. "So I'm part of some ritual now?" Sierra's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You're already inside it." For a moment, silence returned. But it was thicker now, not empty pregnant, with meaning, with tension. Her body language was unreadable. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there like a statue that hadn't yet decided what to become. He studied her face again, the veil barely hiding the shape beneath. Something in her expression, though unseen, ached, a quiet, restrained ache. And Moran realized she had seen others like him, and none of them had stayed. When he finally spoke, it wasn't what he meant to say. "What happened to the last one?" Sierra looked up, eyes gleaming now, not glowing like the others, but alive in a way that felt deeply personal. "He asked to see my face." "And did you show him?" "I did." "What happened to him?" Her breath caught. "He stopped protecting me." That silenced him. He wanted to say something, anything. But the way she stood, the way her fingers slowly curled into themselves, told him the story was not just memory. It was warning, and somehow invitation. The village oracle declares that the trial has begun. Miran is offered food, warmth, and strange ceremonial cloth, then asked to perform rituals he doesn't understand. When he refuses, the villagers begin to weep silently. Sierra explains, "The trial cannot be rejected. It is in his blood now." The dawn came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch this place. Miran stood near the bioluminescent tree, his breath visible in the cool air. The child was gone, taken gently by villagers into the inner chambers beyond his reach. And Sierra had not returned since she whispered about the man who stopped protecting her. He hadn't slept. The stone beneath him still held the echo of something ancient, like standing on the edge of a drum that hadn't been played in centuries. The silence was no longer passive. It was waiting. Then the oracle arrived. A procession of villagers appeared from the archways, walking barefoot over glowing stone veins. In their center floated a platform of crystal and black root, and upon it sat the oracle, an ancient woman, half bone, half veil, her skin stretched with age and ritual ink. Her eyes were closed, and yet she saw everything. Sierra walked behind her, veiled in ceremonial silver now, her presence quieter than before. She did not look at Miran. The oracle raised one trembling hand, then spoke, not in their tongue, not in his, but in a third language, a lost one that cracked like fire and rang like metal. The words vibrated in the stone beneath his boots. One sentence: "The trial has begun." Miran was taken, not forced, not escorted, but silently followed into a chamber beneath the cliffs. There he was offered warmth, food that shimmered, a thin, flowing robe stitched with thin strands of gold and bone, far too light to be warm. They motioned for him to wear it. He hesitated. "I don't understand what this is." The villagers said nothing, only waited. Sierra, still silent, walked forward and offered the robe herself. He took it, not because he agreed, but because her eyes asked him to. The ritual began without warning. He was led to a circular room carved into obsidian, lined with small bowls of flame. He stood in the center, robed, confused, the air heavy with spice and salt. Each villager stepped forward, one by one, dipping fingers into flame, then touching the air above his skin, never making contact. Then Sierra came. Her hands trembled. She stepped closer than the others had. Her fingers hovered near his chest, above the place where his heart beat fast. and for a moment the flames turned blue. She pulled back, visibly shaken. The villagers began to chant, not aloud but in breath, a rhythm, a pulse, a living heartbeat of hundreds inhaling as one. Moran stepped back. "This is insane," he whispered. "I didn't agree to anything." No one stopped him. They only watched and began to weep, silently. One by one, the villagers lowered their heads, not with anger, not with judgment, but sorrow, as if something had died. Moran backed toward the door. Sira followed. He turned sharply. "I'm not part of this. I was just helping a lost child." "No," Sira said, her voice low. "You were chosen by one. That's not the same. It is to us." She led him away from the chamber, down a narrow hall carved with ancient glyphs. It opened to a garden of light vines and falling petals. There, she finally turned to face him. He saw her breathing hard, though she tried to hide it. "You were marked when she touched your skin. The bond doesn't choose at random. It seeks something." "What did it seek in me?" Sira was quiet, then whispered, something none of us remembered until now. He sat on the edge of the garden path, elbows on his knees, the robe still clinging to him like a question he didn't ask. Sira didn't sit beside him, but she stayed, and in that shared silence, something stirred between them. Not comfort, not trust, but something waking. Sira reveals the truth. The child carries a genetic frequency that only bonds to potential leaders. Miran's kindness awakened something dormant in the village code. The more he resists, the stronger the trial binds. Sira begins to tremble in his presence, her body glowing faintly. Their bond was never meant to form, yet it has. That night, the wind carried a scent that didn't belong to any season. Miran stood at the edge of the cliffside, staring down at the firelit paths that wove through the village like veins. His hands still shook from the ritual, not from fear, but from recognition. Something in him had responded, and it terrified him. Sira appeared behind him. "You're changing," she said. "I don't feel like myself." "That's because you're not only yourself anymore." She explained everything by firelight. The child, she said, was not just a daughter of the village. She was a key, engineered long ago before exile, to carry a genetic frequency passed only to those with the potential to lead. A frequency that could bind, not control, not infect, but awaken. The trial was meant to test the one who responded to her touch, not through strength, but through mercy. "You carried her," Sira said, "fed her, defended her. You passed the silent tests without knowing. But I didn't ask for this." "No one ever does," she replied. "And if I walk away?" Sira was quiet for too long. "Then you'll still feel her. You'll still feel me." He turned sharply. "You?" She nodded. "Once." "I shouldn't be this close to you anymore," she whispered. Her hands trembled again, barely visible under her sleeves. As he stepped toward her, she stepped back, but not out of fear. Something in her body glowed, faint, beneath the skin, along her collarbone, down her wrists, like soft starlight. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. The bond. It wasn't supposed to form. Not with me. I was only meant to prepare you. Miran took a breath. "Then why is it happening?" She opened her eyes. "They said the old blood was extinct, that no one from your kind could carry the signal anymore. But when I stood near you in the ritual," her voice faltered, "you resonated. Silence, but not cold. The air between them was alive with things unsaid. Myran stepped forward, not touching her, just closing the distance. "Sira," he said softly, "tell me the truth. If I don't finish the trial, if I don't take this role, what happens to you?" She looked away, and when she finally answered, her voice cracked. "I go dark." The wind picked up, but neither of them moved. She stood there, fragile in stillness, glowing beneath her skin like something about to vanish. And he, once only a surveyor of broken lands, now stood inside a legacy he never chose but couldn't deny. A human military drone appears overhead. Myran is ordered to extract, but as he moves to leave, the child screams and Sira vanishes. Myran discovers encrypted files. The alien bloodline was created by humans in a forgotten experiment. This child may be part human, and so might Sira. The drone came like a black insect against a perfect sky. No sound, no warning. Just a single flicker of motion beyond the cliff edge, and the unmistakable glint of alloy against sun. Myran saw it first, then heard the voice in his ear. "Scout 9 report position. You are in breach of Sector Black." His breath caught. The military channel had been dead for weeks, jammed by the electromagnetic storms. But now, clear as ice, the voice of Central Command pierced through. "You are ordered to extract immediately. Code Delta. Full quarantine in effect. Aerial surveillance en route." He stepped back from the cliff's edge. Below, the village was moving, silent figures emerging from stone doorways, elders gathering near the bloodroot pillars. Sira appeared veiled once more, the glow beneath her skin now hidden behind layered cloth. The child, too, stood at the base of the stairs, arms wrapped around her own shoulders. Myran descended slowly. Her eyes met his, and something in her face cracked open, not fear, but grief. As if she knew what that voice meant, as if she'd heard it before. "Sira," Myran said, moving toward her. "I have to talk to them. Just tell me what to say. Tell them this isn't a threat." But she didn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward and removed her veil. Gasps rippled through the villagers, not loud, but visible. Shoulders tightened, heads bowed. Even the wind seemed to freeze. Sira stood bare-faced before him, and she was not alien, not fully. Her features were a haunting blend: high cheekbones, obsidian eyes with a silvery sheen, lips full and human-shaped. Her skin held the faint, ethereal shimmer of the villagers, but her expression, the way she held pain behind silence that was human, too human. Myran stared. "You." She nodded once. "You were never meant to know," she whispered. "But they found you, just like they found the others." Above them, the drone drew closer. A soft red light swept the area like a whispering eye. "Scout 9. This is your final warning. Extraction in 300 seconds." Sira reached out and took his wrist. And then she vanished. Not in a puff of smoke or teleportation, but in a silent withdrawal. The villagers closed in around her like water folding over a stone. She disappeared into the folds of their bodies, veils, and walls, gone before his next breath. The child screamed. A real, audible, human scream. Myran froze. The sound shouldn't have existed, not in her throat, not among this species. But it wasn't an alien cry. It was familiar. A child's anguish, raw, piercing. She ran to him and beat her fists against his chest. over and over, then collapsed into his arms and whispered a word he shouldn't have understood. Don't. The world fractured after that. The drone retreated, its mission unclear, perhaps waiting for ground confirmation. Miran returned to the crawler, his thoughts a whirlwind of Sira's face, the screen, and the command echoing in his head. Inside the cockpit, something blinked on his console. A data drop, encrypted, unauthorized, buried under layers of dead code. He accessed it. The files were old, ancient by current standards, dusty military archives tagged with redacted names and collapsed project folders. But one symbol appeared again and again: XENO, Human Hybridization Genesis Trace Protocol. And beneath that, Genetic Trial Series, Frequency Bonds. Result: mixed success. Signal receptors only activate with emotional imprint, not tactical authority. Miran scrolled further. There were images: children in clinical environments, hands reaching for strangers, eyes glowing silver. One of them looked exactly like the child he had just held. Another had Sira's face, only younger, without the scars. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just coincidence. She wasn't just bonded to the village. She was created by the same species that abandoned her. His. The file ended with a single command line, dated decades prior. Subjects in Highland region transferred to Phase 0. No further contact. Autonomous evolution permitted. Autonomous evolution. Abandonment with observation. They hadn't destroyed them, they'd watched. Miran closed the file. The drone still hovered in the distance, waiting for him to decide, return and report, or disappear into the cliffside stone with the ones he was never meant to love. He looked at the robe still in the back of the crawler. The cloth glowed faintly in the shadows. The trial hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Miran is dragged before the village stone where leaders are chosen by ritual. The child places her hand on his chest, and the village sky glows. Sira returns, veiled in white, speaking for the first time. She gives him a choice: leave and forget, or stay and lead and never be human again. They came for him at dusk. No words, no weapons, just silent hands. 4 villagers stepped through the crawling vines that had grown over the crawler's hatch. They waited at the threshold, their robes fluttering in a breeze that hadn't existed a second before. Miran stood from the console where the decrypted file still blinked on screen. He didn't resist. Not because he understood, but because he felt something pulling. Not duty, not guilt, something older. They walked him through the village, the sky above, painted in soft hues of violet and blood orange. No one spoke, no one blinked, and yet every eye was turned toward him. When they reached the ancient plateau, Miran saw it for the first time, the stone of ascension. It wasn't carved, it wasn't placed, it grew from the mountain itself, tall and jagged with veins of glowing crystal running through its sides. Vines clung to its edges, flowering only in moonlight. Circles were etched into the ground around it, marked in ash, bone, and something dark that had once been blood. And at the base of the stone stood the child, barefoot, steady, waiting. She stepped forward. Her eyes were no longer innocent. They were ancient, as if something greater had awakened in her. She reached for him again, not like the lost child he'd carried through fire, but like a keeper placing a key in its lock. Her palm pressed against his chest, right over his heart, and the sky lit up. A tremor rippled through the stone, and every torch in the village flared blue. The villagers sank to their knees, one by one, heads bowed. The child didn't move. Her hand still rested on his chest, her gaze locked to his, unflinching. And then, footsteps, soft, deliberate. Sira emerged from behind the stone. She wore white now, no metal threads, no cloak of ritual function. Her robe shimmered like moonlight draped in breath. Her face was veiled again, but her posture was different. Not distant, consecrated. She stepped toward him, stopping just beyond arm's reach. When she spoke, her voice held no tremor, only clarity. "You've seen enough, Miran. Now you must choose." He tried to speak. She stopped him with a slight motion of her hand. "You leave now and you are free. No more questions, no more burdens. You will forget us, and the world will forget you." She stepped closer. Her presence drew the wind toward her like gravity. "Or," she said softly, "you stay. You wear the blood cloth. You take the bond, the child, and the trial into yourself. You will lead us, protect us, become one of us." A pause, then, "But you will never be human again." The wind grew colder. The child stepped back. Her hand fell from his chest. She didn't speak. She only watched, waiting. Myran stood frozen. Everything inside him warred with everything he had ever known. They lied to him, hid the truth. Sira herself had misled him, and yet, what had they done, really? They had tested his heart, not his strength, not his rank, but the part of him no one in the command structure ever touched. The part that carried her through fire, the part that chose Sira even before it knew her name. He looked at Sira. "Why me?" he asked. She didn't answer, but her hands trembled, and that was enough. Myran stepped forward, not in protest, not in submission, but with purpose. He reached for the child's hand. She took it. He turned to Sira and whispered, "Then teach me how to forget being human." The villagers rose. The wind quieted, and the glow of the stone sank into Miran's skin like something coming home after a long, long sleep. He chooses not with words, but with his presence. In silence, Miran steps forward. The bond between him, Sira, and the child activates a memory transfer, the ancient pain, the exile, the hope. He does not return to his world. But every decade, a child lost in fire returns home, carrying his mark. There was no ceremony, no anointing, no oath, only the wind passing through the village trees, warm and scented with dusk leaves. As Myran stood between the woman in white and the child born of fire, he did not speak. Because some choices are made deeper than language. Some choices are made by simply staying. The sky dimmed above the stone as the bond sealed. It wasn't visible, not in the way human science would measure. It was breath, memory, blood, echo. A cord of light wove silently between them. The child, Sira, and Myran. 3 strands, pulled taut, carved into fate, unbreakable. The moment it closed, the villagers raised their hands not in worship, but in relief. For the first time in generations, the exile was broken. He felt it in his chest, not pain, but pressure, as if something ancient was being placed inside him, not from the outside, but awakened from within. Sira stepped forward. Her veil lowered slowly, caught in the hush of the wind. Her face no longer shadowed was not what he expected. It was not perfect. It was haunted, like the face of someone who had waited too long to be touched again. But her eyes, silver, like liquid time, they held him. She raised her hand to his temple, and the transfer began. He saw everything. 1,000 years of silence. The exile decreed by fearful humans, the sealing of their highlands, the sterile experiments that created life bound by instinct and longing. He saw the mothers who bore children that glowed with memory. He saw the fathers who chose death over madness when their bonded ones were taken. And he saw Sira, alone, always watching the edge of the forest, waiting for something not even she could name. Waiting for him. The child beside them pressed her forehead to his arm, and without warning, he remembered her, not from days ago, not from this life, but from another, when he was nothing but a soldier on a distant world, burying the last survivors of a burned village. She had touched his hand even then. She had followed him across lifetimes. When the transfer ended, Myran knelt, not from pain, but from weight, because now he carried the village inside him. He never left, not truly. The crawler was found months later, swallowed by vine and root. Command classified the incident. They said the scout was lost in the meteor storm. No body recovered, no signals ever returned, just silence. But every decade, when the fire season begins, when the sky turns gold and the ash trees burn red from within, a child walks out of the flames, unharmed, always alone, and in their palm, glowing faintly beneath the skin, is a mark shaped like a cord of 3. The villagers know it. They bring the child home, and they whisper, "The man who was never lost has sent us another."